Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to Building Sustainable Ecosystems for Digital Equity. This is part of Michael Baker International's Connecting Communities Playbook webinar series. This series brings together a diverse group of experts to discuss topics related to broadband funding, national programs such as BEAD, Digital Equity Act, Capital Projects Fund, Digital Navigator programs, program management, and more. My name is Beth Crow. I'm with the Public Engagement Team in Michael Baker's Broadband Services practice. And on behalf of the entire Michael Baker team on today's webinar, we thank you for spending the next hour with us. For those of you that aren't as familiar with our firm, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. We're more than 80 years old and a leading provider of engineering and consulting services spanning 4 distinct verticals: infrastructure, design build services, federal programs and services, and consulting and technology solutions, CTS. And our broadband practice is part of CTS. Our firm has more than 3,500 employees across nearly 100 locations. And specific to our broadband practice, we have extensive experience in supporting governmental organizations in planning for and helping manage the rollout of broadband services and programs for its clients that are unserved and underserved as far as internet goes. Our firm delivers broadband projects across the country. We identify unserved locations, develop the framework for affordability programs, engage stakeholders to identify users, usage, and uses. We implement connected smart city technology and coordinate broadband implementation on surface transportation improvement projects. Today, we will explore the issues underpinning internet adoption, affordability, literacy, and ongoing funding to promote digital equity, all with an eye to developing solutions. I'm going to take a few minutes and just introduce our panelists, and then we're going to get our discussion underway. We've got 3 outstanding panelists with us today. The first is Kirsten Compitello. She's credentialed by the American Institute of Certified Planners, and she is our National Broadband Digital Equity Director. Kirsten is leading Michael Baker's efforts to understand the digital impact on community and people, factoring in past inequities to close gaps, to ensure broadband investments are reaching those who need it, and paired with necessary supporting programs. She leverages her more than 15 years of experience in the urban planning industry and building community-oriented systems through public engagement, visual storytelling, and smart policy to enhance digital equity and inclusion across the broadband industry. Next, we have Tiara Sneerling. She's a senior broadband strategy consultant. She serves as the lead digital equity strategist for digital opportunity planning and BEAD planning for Michael Baker. She has a diverse background in both digital equity and project management, including over 20 years of experience developing scope, budget, planning, resource management, and project implementation. She has deep knowledge of digital equity and working with nonprofits to identify and alleviate disparities in the communities, including having served as digital equity program manager and broadband infrastructure project manager for municipal governments in Texas and Louisiana, with concentrations on laying the groundwork for broadband infrastructure design and equity planning. And last but certainly not least, we've got Joshua Williams. He's a senior broadband and digital equity planner with Michael Baker. He's involved in the design, the development, and delivery of statewide digital equity plans and state, municipal, and community-based programs. He also has deep experience designing and leading short-term and long-term digital equity initiatives. Immediately prior to joining Michael Baker, Joshua was with the City of Houston's Office of Innovation, where he spearheaded digital inclusion initiatives. And prior to that, he was Director of Operations and Finance with a charter school system, where he led efforts to provide internet and technology for students and their families during the height of the pandemic. Just a couple quick housekeeping issues to comment on. We like everybody to keep their microphones on mute, and we strongly encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'd like you to use the chat function for that. We're going to go back at the end of the presentation and go back over and make sure we cover off those questions. And just a quick thank you to our Michael Baker marketing colleague, Stephanie McCowett, for monitoring the chat. So let's get underway. we're going to begin our discussion on building sustainable ecosystems for digital equity. And first, right off the bat, we want to ensure we are all working from the same definition of digital equity. So our first question is to Kirsten. Kirsten, what do we mean by digital equity?
Thanks, Beth. That is a great question to open with. I know that a lot on the line are already familiar with this, but digital equity is a pretty big topic. It covers really the condition for what it takes for people to be connected and successful using the internet and interacting with the digital world, the digital opportunities that we have online. And that certainly starts with the infrastructure. We do a lot of infrastructure at Michael Baker, and we consider digital equity to be a part of that step as well. But there is more to it. It includes access to broadband service, high-speed, reliable broadband service. It also includes devices. There's no point in us investing in all of this infrastructure to have broadband service everywhere if people aren't able to meaningfully connect, if they don't have the right devices, if they're not able to afford that service, if they don't know how to use it. So when we talk about digital equity, we're talking about this full series, and we are excited to dive more into this with you all today, this full series of components from access, devices, affordability, digital literacy skills, and ongoing technical support to help people maintain the devices and the skills that they have and find solutions moving forward. I just want to add in one other additional term that we'll be talking about, which is digital inclusion. As we talk about digital equity, that is the outcome we're working towards. But digital inclusion is really the work that it refers to the steps and the measures that we need to take along the way to get to that end condition where everybody has equitable access and equitable ability to be online.
Kirsten, thank you. So digital equity, it's big, it's huge, and it takes a lot of different partners in the process. And that's what we're talking about with the digital equity ecosystem. So Tiara, can you shed some light on that? What is the digital equity ecosystem?
Okay. Thanks, Beth. When we talk about the digital ecosystem, we're really talking about that framework that allows us to actually meet the need of the community. So when I think about that, I do think about addressing things like access and affordability, digital literacy skills, and beyond. That can include devices, training. It's just I like to explain it as a wheel. I call it the wheel of equity. And inside that wheel creates the ecosystem. And again, that's going to be access. So it's not enough that you can just access the internet. You have to be able to afford it. So we talk about those affordability plans and those options that help people afford it. And then it's not enough that you can afford it if you don't have a device. So then we go on to talk about how you secure those devices. And now that you have a device, you need to know how to use it. So that's where the digital literacy skills come into play. And then I like to take it a step further and say, you have the device, you can access the internet, you have these skills, but what happens when your PC or your laptop is broken? So we take it further into device repair, and we go, and this wheel can continue on, but the goal is for it to be inclusive to the point that each spoke on the wheel is interdependent on the next. And that, again, can go even further into policy. So we have to have policy and legislation in place in order to ensure that people have access to all these resources and services in the ecosystem.
Thank you. And let me ask you, Joshua, when we think about this ecosystem, let's just unpack it a little bit more and talk about the components of the ecosystem and the life cycle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beth. Hope everyone can hear me okay, and thank you for tuning in. Yeah, the digital equity ecosystem, we identified 4 components. Stakeholders, those are the governments, the ISPs, the technology companies, the individuals, and the end users that partake in the ecosystem. And then infrastructure, that is the broadband, internet, the computer devices needed to partake in the ecosystem. And then digital skills and literacy, as Tiara mentioned, that know-how. Now that I have these things, how do I wield them and use them and take advantage of them? And then funding and resources. All of these things cost money. They need funding. And so that part of the ecosystem is the funding and resources to make all of these things come together and happen.
That's great. And then what about the life cycle of this system?
Yeah, we identified 6 stages of the life cycle. That first one being assessment and planning. It's bringing together the stakeholders to identify the gaps, the needs, assess the market, and figure out what those priorities are. We have implementation and deployment as number 2, monitoring and evaluation, iteration and adaptation, scaling and sustainability, and collaborations and knowledge sharing. So kind of touched on number 1, but I do want to go back to number 2 on implementation and deployment. So my colleagues can weigh in as well on this one. Implementation and deployment, I think I'll start there, just those efforts made to close the digital equity gap. But I do want to pause and let Kirsten and Sierra weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, well, thanks, Josh. We could go into all of these in a bit of depth. That was a really fantastic overview of the life cycle, and there's a lot of information in there to unpack. So we wanted to unpack a little bit. Joshua mentioned steps 1, assessment and planning, and then 2, implementation and deployment. These are both really big topics right now, as all 50 states are going through preparing a digital equity plan, as well as a 5-year action plan. Some of those are already out for public review, in fact. So this has been a big year of investment into those first 2 steps, assessment and planning, and then putting together implementation steps at a statewide level, which is fantastic to see. And as we talk about this digital equity ecosystem, there have been a lot of these small ecosystems in past years, but this is our first opportunity to really take a state level approach. Again, all 50 states are doing this, to come up with what the ecosystem will be at a state level and create the connections between resources and the connections between potential partners. And then also be preparing for how to create the sustainable funding sources to be able to maintain those and sustain them over time. So we're very excited to see that there is so much movement right now in those first 2 steps, assessment and planning, and implementation and deployment. But also making sure that we're all thinking about through our work, or through those of you who are involved as stakeholders in any of these efforts, thinking about how we can be continuing to move with those additional steps and be setting up the processes, the evaluation processes, and the funding processes to sustain the work that is happening right now.
Yep. It's a professional monitoring and evaluation. Kirsten did a great job just laying that out for us. But the 4th one is iteration and adaptation. And this is where we think evaluations and feedback come in to refine those digital equity strategies and interventions. And I'll pause and let Sierra jump in and elaborate as well.
Okay. Obviously, we talk about sustainability, we talk about this iteration and adaptation, all that goes together. We talk about being involved with the community. We talk about getting their feedback. Those community conversations are important. All the surveys and the information that's gathered helps us understand what those assets are, understand who our partners are, understand what the partners bring to the table. And even as we move from there to think about what the plan is going to look like, we can set an outline for what the plan is going to look like, what it's going to entail, what step is going to be needed to make sure each one of these items on the list are met. And then we move into scaling and sustainability. So let's talk a little bit more about those partners and the resources that they bring. So having good partners is always going to be key, because the goal is for us to create something that outlives us in its current state, something that's going to live on beyond this current need money, beyond this planning that's happening right now across all states. We want to talk about what sustainability looks like. I think about these sustainability models a lot in regards to who's going to carry this work out for the next 20, 30 years. There are many states and places that are doing programs that are, doing just that. They're interacting with the youth and getting them at an early stage. So, and bringing them into fiber and some of those jobs that are needed right now in order to make sure this work gets done. And so I do look at the youth as their own sustainability model in a sense, because they'll be the ones who can carry this work out further than where we are right now.
Thank you, Sierra. And the final step that we identify is collaboration and knowledge sharing. Stakeholders coming together to collaborate and improve learning and increase digital equity impact, collaboration across sectors to encourage innovative approaches to closing the digital divide. That's our final step that we identified, though.
That's great. Thank you. We're going to shift a little bit from kind of this macro view of the ecosystem, maybe to a little more personalized individual view. I'm going to add a comment to Tiara's point about, getting this feedback from individuals and from families, from communities that we're doing through conversations in the community, through surveys, things like that. Something that we find in our work across various states is, and maybe because of the urgency that came on for broadband interconnectivity with the pandemic, there are groups, there are parts of the country that are surveyed out when it comes to being asked about their broadband needs. And something that we're doing is really emphasizing, we know you've been asked and asked sometimes. This is different. This is historic, once in a generation funding. And, this is going to bring about change. And so your voice is really crucially needed. And that helps a little bit with helping to draw people out to talk about something that maybe a little bit they've talked about before and didn't see a whole lot of change. But thinking about people and individuals and households, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about adoption. And I'm going to put this to Kirsten, what are people's most significant hurdles to broadband adoption that we're seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. This is a question that a lot of people have been asking, and a lot of people have been researching. So I don't think that our findings, which we'll talk about, are any different than the findings that so many others have also identified. When we talk about a digital equity ecosystem, we've identified that people need to have those other types of access. They need access to devices. They need to be able to afford plans in order to get online. And what happens if they don't have those is that the service may be available, but residents aren't actually subscribed to it. And that's called adoption. That's our adoption rate. Have they adopted broadband service or have they not? And there are a number of people around the country who do have access to infrastructure, who they could sign up for broadband service if they wanted to, but they haven't. And there are a number of reasons for that. Obviously, one of the first ones is maybe there is not infrastructure. But if there is, perhaps they find that the cost is too high. And that's a really common issue. Money is an important factor when people set out their budgets. And the cost of internet can be quite high in some areas. In some of the work that we did in one of the regions in Pennsylvania, about 2 years ago, we actually were hearing from residents in rural areas who were paying $200 or more for service, for broadband service. And they were getting less service, they were getting lower speeds and less reliability than people in urban areas in and around the city of Pittsburgh, for example, who are paying far less and getting better results. And that is a message that we've heard over and over again. It's not unique to Southwestern Pennsylvania. That is a national trend. The prices are very widely and they are very much market driven. And so in some places you may have no choice of provider. There may be only one option and that allows the prices to go higher. Regardless of where it comes from, affordability is a key issue. And the cost of internet is something that many people struggle with in different ways. There's also digital literacy. I know we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on, but digital literacy is the ability to use the internet, and everyone is at a different level. It's essentially a form of education, and education is ongoing for all of us. But digital literacy can be a barrier when you have users who have very limited experience with using a computer. They may struggle to sign up in the first place, or they may not see the value in it. They may not know what they're missing. If they've gone a long time without using internet opportunities, they may, not see what value it brings to their life. And that's certainly valid and relevant, but it is our goal at a national level to make sure that service is available to everybody who wants to use it. There's also language and social barriers. Non-native English speakers certainly struggle far more often with signing up for service, with using opportunities that are available online. This gets more into the digital inclusion piece, but beyond making sure that they have the understanding to be able to sign up, we also have a lot of work to do in many different ways to make sure that the resources that are available online, the services, programs, websites are accessible, and that there are assistive technologies and language assistance at every step of the way.
Thank you.
I could go on and on, but Beth, I'll pass it back to you.
No, well, thank you. Yeah, so you've got, as we just talked about and Kirsten just articulated so well, significant hurdles that are known and certainly that we're seeing. And when we think about those barriers, and once they get removed or reduced, does that necessarily increase adoption? And if not, is there a reason some individuals don't utilize the internet even when it's accessible? I'm going to ask Tiara and Joshua to weigh in on this and on their insights and what they're seeing, and also on some experiences they've had in the field. Tiara?
I'll go ahead and weigh in on that. So you're right. There are places where we could say, oh, it's because I didn't have access. It was not available to me. But then there are those places where it is available. And so we try to understand, well, if it's available, why aren't you connecting to it? You know, you would think 1 + 1 is 2 in your mind. You need to go further, right? You need to think further outside the box. What are those obstacles? What are the barriers to adoption? What's causing these people not to connect to this service now that it's here? So in my experience, in my past experience in standing up public Wi-Fi, I've seen where there were communities where people just didn't want to connect to something that was perhaps provided by the government. And that came from a mistrust of government. So we have to think about that. It's also something to think about. Of course, you could go down a rabbit hole with that, but you know, mistrusting government and any services or governments, you know, having access to any of their information, those types of things were holding people back from adopting. And then we go a little bit further and we could say, you know, there are some cultural factors that cause people not wanting to adapt, right? So even if you think about, you know, different sets of sensitive people and their different cultures, they may not want access to the internet. Again, that's a privacy issue. But I think overall, when I think about why people aren't adapting, we do drive it at the cost level. We do drive it at accessibility. But more than anything, I think we can also drive it at the marketing level. And I can say that it's a lack of awareness in some places, a lack of awareness of the programs that can help with affordability, lack of awareness of what the benefits are of the internet. Again, and that goes into the digital literacy piece that Kirsten spoke about earlier.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, Beth, you know, as we discussed, we operate under the assumption that, you know, if we build it, they will come. You know, there are just some cases where I think, you know, Tiara and myself at the local government level, there were ISPs that provided free services, subsidy programs, and we just did not see the adoption rates increase. And that's just for various reasons, as Tiara just mentioned. But I think we sometimes operate under that assumption that it's available, you have access, we're making it affordable, sometimes free, just, you know, you should adopt this. It's, you know, this will be good for you, but we have to respect people's desires. Some of these families that we're trying to serve, they have competing needs, lack of trust for government. They want to sign up for another benefit or a subsidy program, you know, just that constant reminder of where they are in life that could be burdensome to some families. So we want to respect all of those wants, those desires, those choices, and just know that we have to do a lot more legwork to ensure that we're communicating the benefits to increase adoption rates.
Such a great point. We certainly, in the work that Michael Baker is doing in various states and markets, something that we're hearing a lot about is about subsidies. And ACP, many people on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with ACP, the American Connectivity Program, that provides a $30 subsidy for qualifying households. other types of subsidies that would be beneficial, not that currently exist, but to come. Let's talk about that for a minute. So Kirsten, let me ask you, as we're hearing about subsidies more and more from people and a need for them, what are the barriers and the obstacles to the subsidy programs that we're hearing about and thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And this does tie into one of our discussion topics today, where we want to talk about what local governments can do and what partnerships can accomplish to help build a sustainable digital equity ecosystem. Beth mentioned the Affordable Connectivity Program. The ACP is the most, it's really the most established subsidy that is available currently. There are some local programs in certain places, but the ACP is a national program, and it does provide a subsidy, both for internet service, $30 off internet service, as well as for a device. So it also provides up to $100 off of a device for eligible families. And not everyone knows that that program exists. And we do have to anticipate that whether this program continues or not, and it is about to run out of funding. So we'll put our call to action here. If you are familiar with the ACP and want to see it continued, this is the time to be advocating to Congress to extend the funding for the ACP program. And there's certainly a lot of support and a lot of advocacy for that. But the barriers that the ACP has experienced are the same barriers that we should be knowing about and considering as any other form of subsidy is being considered or put together at a state or regional or at any other level. One of the big barriers to the ACP is that it is income-based, and that helps get it to the people who may need it most, but it also introduces additional barriers on its own. By making it income-based, there is an additional series of paperwork to fill out. There's a qualifications process, and that can slow people down. It can also be experienced as a bit of a stigma. There are individuals who don't want to go through that process, who feel like they don't, who don't feel good about having to give their income levels again and again. It is something that is closely tied to eligibility for a number of other federal programs, but eligibility doesn't automatically transfer. And so families who find themselves qualifying will still have to qualify, fill out the paperwork in multiple different places. If they, qualify for another subsidy, for example, they don't automatically get enrolled in the ACP program. And that is an unfortunate oversight, an unfortunate barrier that adds additional steps to households that are trying to go through the qualification process for this. It can be done by phone, it can be done by paper, but it is set up primarily to be done online. And of course, someone who doesn't have internet access or can't afford it is going to have a hard time filling out that form. It's an additional step to scroll to the bottom and find that you can download a paper form. What if you don't have a printer? That you can call in by phone, but then it can take quite a long time. And we've heard a lot of stories about people spending multiple hours on the phone or multiple hours with a digital navigator or a family or relative assisting them in this process. It honestly is not asking for an enormous amount of information, but because it's asking for it online and it's asking for personal documents to be uploaded, it is really not an easy process, and people do spend a lot of time doing it. I'll just throw in my own story here. I tried to help my 90-year-old grandmother sign up for it, and we failed. She lost interest. It took too long. It meant digging out paper forms that she couldn't remember where they were, proof of income, proof of this and that, and it was quite a barrier. I won't go too much longer on that, but I did want to highlight there's another key issue with any subsidy program. It's already impacting the ACP, and that's long-term funding sustainability. We can put massive efforts into creating these programs, advocating for them, educating people on what's available, helping them sign up. But if we are doing all that effort, putting all that time and investment into getting people signed up for subsidies, and then those subsidies run out of funding the next year, we are back at square one. And we are at that place with the ACP right now. It is currently close to running out of funding and its future is uncertain. And that needs to be addressed for the ACP and or for any other subsidy that may be created moving forward. We need to make sure that if we're getting people connected with the promise of some financial assistance, that financial assistance has to be designed to be sustainable over time.
Yeah, thank you. And the affordability being just a key component of creating sustainable adoption rates. And I'm actually going to turn to Joshua and ask about this a bit. But as states are considering and working on their digital equity plans, in addition to their BEAD plans, and then also municipalities on their own levels, looking at broadband infrastructure builds, and what we're all saying and what we all know, building it isn't enough. You've got to be able to get people to adopt and sustain that adoption. And so, Joshua, let me turn to you. What would help create sustainable adoption rates?
Yeah, well, you touched on affordability, sure. And there's fees involved with this service, device fees, charges that show up on bills. And, it raises the question of, I have this subsidy, but in the long run, can I afford it? So I think, really making plans and efforts to sustain that affordability to Kirsten's point that she just made. And I'm moving to communication. I think that is a big piece of this, and Beth and her team, public engagement and communication, they do a great job supporting all of our work with communication, but making sure that they're receiving messages from trusted community anchor institutions, ISPs, governments, et cetera, over communicating and making sure that we are meeting people where they are, communicating in multiple languages to make sure that the message clearly gets across. And we want to touch on some of the communication examples. I'm sure T and Kirsten can weigh in as well. But we've experienced that work prior to me joining Michael Baker on the ground, local government. Things just were not communicated clearly or from a trusted source in the eyes of the people that we were trying to connect with. I think Kirsten and T, they may have examples as well. I'll pause if they want to share one.
I'll just share. Transparency was a big thing. Actually, in Louisiana, we were working on a project trying to get some philanthropy funds. And one of the things we recognized was that people just didn't trust government. And again, that goes back to, and that's just so far reaching of just not trusting government with your information or trusting anything they're giving you, even if it's free. Right? So most people think you're getting something for free, you're getting something for low cost, automatically you're going to take it. But we've seen examples where we've got thousands of laptops sitting somewhere and they're free and no one's coming to get them. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they're probably being distributed by a government entity. So now we have people who are concerned with their privacy, concerned with anything the government could give them. And, sometimes even a conspiracy theory, whatever it is that's keeping them from wanting to take something from government. So again, I really look down at trust. And you talked about having a trusted community advisor or someone who advocates for the community. So I think, again, that goes into partnerships with the right types of nonprofits and boots on the ground people who can actually be the voice for different groups of people and can help them get the things that they need. So once they see that their trusted advisor or advocate is advocating for these things for them and wanting to introduce them, it's kind of like that secondary security layer that allows them to actually access those services and take advantage of them.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue, T. Thank you. One, I want to segue into policy and advocacy because we touched on government. Sometimes there's distrust. Sometimes there's just that lack of awareness. So we're helping all levels of government connect with their constituents, develop policy, get them involved in policy and advocacy, even if it's just a learning session or a group gathering to explain what the policies are. And how they can become involved. So I think raising awareness, mobilizing support, and driving policy change is a good way to sustain those affordable adoption rates. So I do want to mention that, and Kirsten touched on this a moment ago, but innovative subsidy programs. We're partnering with clients to try to figure out how can we get creative and also sustainable. We have tools and funds coming in. We can take advantage of those to really stand up some programs that will outlast us, as Tiara mentioned. So I do think innovative subsidy programs would help, and waiving late fees. I want to pause. I know Kirsten can weigh in on this, but sometimes waiving late fees and just that action alone will increase some trust and some participation. But I want to pause, if Kirsten, you want to add on to that.
Oh, Joshua, I think you covered it. You covered it well.
Okay. Well, waiving late fees and digital equity grants. We have several states that are developing these digital equity grants. They're receiving that funding, and local government as well. They're receiving funding. They've identified partners, community anchor institutions that can be awarded these funds, and identify how they can deploy these funds to make sure that adoption rates, affordable, high quality broadband and computer devices are accessible to multiple people. And I'll pause there and turn it back over to you, Beth.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's just such a huge topic, and thinking about that, the government agencies, the educational institutions, nonprofit organizations. I know Tiara just mentioned private funders, foundation funding. Again, all stakeholders in the ecosystem that are just so critical. And what's exciting that's happening as these engagements are happening in communities around planning for this infrastructure funding that's coming, is these stakeholders are coming together, not necessarily for the first time, but again, they're coming together now knowing that there's funding coming, and that this time it's really possible to do some things that are innovative and can make a difference. And I think that's part of the exciting stuff we're seeing, certainly in the states that we're working in. Let me ask you, I'm going to go back to you, Tiara and Joshua, and stick with that a little bit. Thinking about Michael Baker, how can Michael Baker contribute to increasing sustainable adoption rates through our work?
Okay, I guess I'll jump in there. When you talk about how we're going to increase those through our work, I think we have a lot of amazing tools at Michael Baker that help us with identifying assets. We have an amazing team who's on the ground doing that community work, being that real-time feedback that helps us understand exactly what it is that the residents actually need. Now, I'll digress a little bit, because I like to figure out what it is that people really need. So it's not enough that we have a good service or a good thing and we want to give it to someone, but we have to really understand what the community actually needs. So those needs and assessments, tasks that we're doing here at Michael Baker, trying to figure out what those gaps are and what additional services are needed in order to increase the adoption are important. Again, here at Michael Baker, we actually attend a lot of different workshops and summits and webinars and conferences, and we go out and, we try to figure out on a national level, on a local level, what's really happening out there and where we fit in and how we can contribute and what things we can glean from other people in this space and what things they're doing. And if I take that just even a little bit further, I think about increasing adoption rates. There are some things that people aren't thinking about, and that is that collaboration with those nonprofits and senior citizens centers and churches. There's just so many different examples of ways you could increase adoption. Again, taking account awareness and how you get that word out and how you make that accessible to everyone at whatever level they're at.
And one more point to add to that, making all of those efforts that Tiara just laid out for you, making all those people centered, because that's what this is all about. So we're working with different partners to increase collaboration, awareness, sustainability, but through a digital equity lens, making sure that all of our efforts are people centered. So I think that's something that we really focus, we hone in on it at Michael Baker. So I want to mention that point, Bill.
Yeah,
I
that's a
add
great
one
point.
real quick thing here to build off of that, because Beth, you had started us off with the question on sustainable adoption, and I just want to bring it back to highlighting that sustainable piece. That was really the part that Joshua, I think, just finished with. We can talk about getting adoption rates up, but through the work we're doing, we are looking to make sure we're building that on the ground capacity, building the partnerships and the internal community support. And then also making sure that just any policy and regulatory decisions are made, that they're all designed to be sustainable, that they're designed to not, end the year later and run out of capacity and run out of support. But thinking about how to design them so that they are built with ongoing support and built to last over time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. It's surprising this hour is flying by. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We want to talk about digital literacy. Let me go to you, Tiara. Why is digital literacy such an essential component of digital equity?
I think digital literacy is essential. It's just one of the core pieces, right? It's one of those legs on the stool. It's a part of that spoke on the wheel. You have to have it. Again, you might have access, you might have a laptop, and you need to know how to use it. That education and training is such a key piece because it opens doors for things like workforce. Again, let's talk about what the benefits are. Why would I even want to learn how to use this? I can access government benefits online. I can job search. I can do remote work and remote learning. And that's about accessing. Then, you need to have the know-how. And that needs to come in the form of education and training at a very novice level. There's the basic digital skills, and then there's more advanced sustainable skills that you're going to need in order to use, your laptop or your computer and to stay connected. There's a social aspect as well. And you can take that even into digital literacy. How do you interact with other people? How do you actively participate? If you don't know how to do any of this or how to access, then that becomes an issue. The literacy piece, it just encompasses so much, but really, when you think about the training literacy piece, it's just another piece that can even segue into workforce development and job training and job skilling and all these different types of upskilling that is going to be needed for you to actively participate.
Thank you.
Maybe add a little bit to that,
Mhm.
because everything that Tiara shared is really valuable. And this kind of goes back to the communication piece we talked about earlier. It's important to continue talking about all the different needs that people have, because it's really easy to forget the types of, to think that, oh, I know how to do this, and not realize how many gaps might exist elsewhere. And I know this is something we've seen at government and policymaker levels as well. So I'll share an example. We helped put together a digital navigator program for a county in Pennsylvania a little bit ago. It's a project very near and dear to my heart. And we talked to a lot of stakeholders throughout that process, and we heard some really surprising things that we weren't entirely expecting. And I know that the county was not really expecting. We had started this project thinking that the primary need was with seniors, and we certainly heard that that was a need. But we also heard about school children who were very, very familiar using a smartphone, but didn't really know how to write papers, didn't know how to use Word. We heard about people struggling to attend. We heard about one gentleman trying to attend a funeral on Zoom from the library, and he was unable to because the devices in the computer lab were wonderful and the librarians were wonderful, but the computers were not equipped with audio and video capacity. And I believe perhaps he had video, but not audio capacity. So he could see, but no one could hear him, couldn't interact. And so we heard stories like this about the kinds of things that people were looking for. And it went so much beyond trying to get online to get healthcare, trying to get online to fill out job applications. There were individuals who were learning new skills after being incarcerated and re-entering into society and learning computer skills for the very first time. And even just a few classes gave them the confidence they needed and the skill they needed to be able to start interacting with job websites, to be able to be taking advantage of classes, the more detailed classes that were available to them, and starting their own businesses. So it was a really interesting project, and those are some of the stories that we've seen in our work, and really highlight that ongoing value of making sure that even at a policymaker level, we really are communicating how impactful this can be for people. It is far more, it is about far more than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, so true. We have just about 10 minutes left, and we definitely want to leave some time for questions. I think we'll close out. Let's talk a little bit briefly about coalitions. This is something that all three of you have mentioned in one way or another in our last topics that we've been talking about, and the importance when we think of all the stakeholders in the ecosystem and having some or all of those, depending on what the specific initiative is being a coalition, right? And so we know that there's a coalition of the willing. Everybody involved believes and wants to see change, wants to see internet access and adoption. But is it also a coalition of the able? Is sort of how I like to think of it. We know they're willing. Is everybody able? And by able, we mean they're already at capacity. So how do we help measure that and define it and see that we can maybe help with capacity? And but let's back up and just say that's one of the things I think that limits coalitions and on the ground planning. Joshua, is there some insights you have about this as well?
Yeah, thank you, Beth, and you're absolutely right about touching on limited capacity and resources sometimes, but also developing a shared vision and mission, and also working in silos. Again, you mentioned, Beth, everybody's willing and able. Everyone also has competing needs. They have different populations that they're trying to serve. They have different skill sets that they specialize in. And this is what I know, this is how I can help. And so they're working in a silo. And what we're trying to do is bring everybody together, fill those gaps, develop that shared vision and mission, and make sure that each organization that we're supporting at Michael Baker, they're seen, they're heard, and they know their exact role that they want to play in the coalition. And we support them and build capacity so they can do just that. Pandemic hit. If I'm in a coalition and I specialize in supporting telehealth, and I'm hyper focused on telehealth, right? If I'm focused on digital literacy, adult literacy, and I'm hyper focused on that area, we try to bridge the gaps at Michael Baker's to make sure that all of those specialties become one and move in one direction in coalitions. And I'm going to pause. I think Kirsten is going to weigh in.
Oh, Joshua, I think you said it great. Yeah, it can be a big lift to bring together a lot of disparate partners, and sometimes having that extra capacity can certainly help out. And that is one of the things that we've done and found has been very effective and has helped coalitions move forward when we can help them lead their stakeholder engagement, help kind of with that strategic visioning, pulling everybody to the table at the same time, and also supporting with some of the more time-intensive tasks like data management and reporting that can be really hard for small outfits and small nonprofits to be able to pull off all of that lift on their own. But making those resources available and helping to create the systems to connect people is certainly a good way to help coalitions, and it is one of the ways that we within our team have helped some of the coalitions that we've worked with.
Well, and I know too, one of the things that we do is really emphasize clearly defining roles within a coalition. Who's doing what? And I know that's something important. Again, I feel like we're rushing through this. There was another topic that we did want to cover, and I'm going to ask our group. Let's talk a little bit about local government. And as I look through some of the things that we hope to cover when we talk about local government, one of those things is digital equity, inclusion, certifications, and acknowledgements. And that's developing a system to recognize and validate digital equity and inclusion programs. And let me ask just all three panelists, would one of you like to comment on that thought, that concept?
I'm unmuted, so I'll go first. This is one I've talked about a lot. I know we could all dive into this, but there is a huge increased awareness of the need for more digital literacy support, digital skills training, and digital navigators. That's a big topic. It's a nationally recognized best practice to have digital navigators and work with people one-on-one. And creating programs like this that are focused on digital inclusion and focused on training, it does give them more validity and more support to go look for long-term and sustainable and repeated funding if they have a certification that they can point to that is part of a shared system that's recognized. But what we're also seeing is that systems like this, they take people, they take human resources. And so we need those kinds of certifications, not just for the programs, but for the people. A lot of these programs have been historically run by using a lot of volunteer support. Or they've been embedded into the duties of another job, like librarians are a huge asset for this, but that is not their sole job description, and they're juggling a lot of different things. In order to really be delivering the kinds of services that we are talking about and that are needed, we need to think about certifications for individuals as well, having a way for people to become digital skills specialists, digital navigators, and have that be a viable career path.
Great point. Piera, Joshua, is there anything you'd like to add to this or the discussion overall? We're going to wrap and move on to questions in a minute, but we'd love to hear some more thoughts.
I do want to say dedicated digital equity funding will be great to have. Just a line item in the budget where it is the only focus for that line item is to fund digital equity, digital inclusion. If that could be built in the budgets at all levels of government, I think that will definitely help, especially local governments. I'll pause and let you weigh in.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree. I think you guys have said it. It's been said. I mean, just when you think about what it's going to take at a government level, you think about getting those local officials and everybody on board, understanding their mind and how important these things are. But again, being that advocate and bringing that forth to the front of their brains, like, really talking about it, letting it, digital equity, letting digital inclusion, just the digital needs in this space, like letting that be known to government, letting it be important, bringing it to the forefront. I think right now we have a lot of eyes, like Kirsten, said before. This is a time where the whole world is looking at digital equity. A lot of us, we've been in this space a long time, and we've been doing this a long time, but now everyone has eyes on it. So I think this is a pivotal time for us to really talk about digital equity and really talk about how important it is and how it's just the foundation of moving everything forward in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you both touched on, local government and dedicated digital equity funding. Both of these tie up together with the idea of making sure that this is sustainable. And we're communicating, in local governments are communicating with their constituents and understanding that this is not going to be a one and done. We don't invest in education one year and consider the next year it's done. We don't invest in economic development one year and consider the next year it's done. And digital equity and inclusion is going to be the same way. Computers get out of date, they get old, they need to be replaced. Software gets old, it needs to be replaced. Skills can always be improved. Digital skills is essentially another type of education. There is not going to be a point at which we make an investment and then walk away and assume that nothing further will be needed. This is something where we set up the ecosystem sustainably so that it can continue to build upon itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do want to see if we have any questions. I know we only have a few minutes left. I'm looking now. I see a comment from Trey Hall. Thank you for the comment. Your description of the capacity limits experienced on the enablement side extends and applies to the infrastructure and tech market that provides too. Support is how we empower the gap. Thank you. You're so right. Trey, also ACP policy model is broken. FCC started restructuring. The USF Universal Services Fund in 2010, and the ongoing reformulation of that system needs to ingest. I agree with you. And I think we all agree with you, frankly, and look at it from, at Michael Baker, we look at it from the perspective of what can we do to help, right? We are talking with municipalities, we're talking with individuals in community. What is the right and best way for us to be able to give this feedback back to the right people making policy and decisions going forward? I personally feel it would be a shame to have ACP go away before it really is executed really smoothly. It's challenging, as we've talked about, for folks to sign up for it. So we are at 158. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joshua.
Real quick, I want to weigh in on Trey's comment about, capacity limits extended to, the tech side, the infrastructure side of this digital equity piece as well. We agree with you, and I just want to, really throw it out there that collaboration and partnerships is always key, even at the local government level, trying to develop public-private partnerships. In the tech world, how can we work together, workforce development? We're just always helping clients try to figure out those ways to collaborate and sustain this work. So I do want to mention that, and I'll go on mute now, Belle, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you, fantastic. We are literally 2 minutes before the end of our discussion, and we want to be mindful of your time. Trey, thank you. We appreciate that your positive feedback. We are happy to do this series. It is a whole series, so we encourage you to take a look at the other offerings in the series. You can find that at michaelbaker.com. Please keep in touch with us. Feel free to contact any of us. Again, you can do that through michaelbaker.com. And thank you, Kirsten and Tiara and Joshua, for your insights today. And I think with that, we will say thank you and wish everybody a good day. Thank you.